Oh, that's a nice looking arm there.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we just started the live stream, so we can begin now.
Okay, great. Welcome everybody to our August Environment and Climate Committee meeting. We'll start with the roll call and then minutes, and then roll through our normal agenda. I can't see, I'm on a different setup because I'm not at home, so I can't see everybody's face, so just make sure to speak up when you're here, or if someone's clearly not here, just somebody tell me. So we'll start with Bill.
Howdy, I'm here.
Covey.
Here.
Kelly.
Here.
Kersey.
Here.
Mark.
Here.
Neil Bonsgaard's here. Peter Grube is not going to be able to make it today. Rory.
Here.
Serena.
Here.
I don't think Tess is going to be able to make it today. Is Sasha here? Or Ann Berkey? Okay, so both of them, Tess, Peter, Ann, and Sasha are not present. Everyone else is here. Wonderful. So next we'll go into the meeting minutes from July 8th. Is there anything in that we need to review, or is anybody's name spelled wrong, or something that an eagle-eyed committee member already saw?
I guess the only question I have on the minutes, they're fairly high level, where you can't really recreate the discussion. It's just kind of gives a bullet of what was decided, or or what we were going to do. It doesn't really say, Brownsguard said and Welch said blah
Right.
blah. So that's the only thing. I mean, I guess that's how they're taking the minutes, and it's recorded, right?
Yeah, that's the new system, is that there's a recording, so you don't have to guess. And then we just have a couple of cues of decisions that are being made, so then those are documented well.
Okay, well, so
and we're just for a little more context, we're trying to standardize the minutes across all committees. So I know that Kayla, our assistant city recorder, was kind of directed to put them in that same standard system.
Okay. Yeah, okay, so I'll move to approve the minutes as written.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Great. Let's use raise hand function for approving the meeting minutes as written. Looks like everybody that's present. All right. I am not sure. It looks like we have potentially have some people here for public comment, or there's at least people watching in on the Zoom call. So if you would like to participate in the public comment section of this meeting, you're on mute right now, but if you want to select the raise hand function, then a staff member will be able to call on you and provide the ability to unmute your microphone. And it doesn't look like we have anybody that called in. So right now we have Mike Riley with his hand raised.
Okay, and that looks good. And if we get up committee members, put their hands down. And then.
Oh, that's me, sorry.
Oh, there was a couple of people. Okay, so Mike, I'm giving you permission to speak, and you have 3 minutes to share a comment.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for letting me comment today, and thanks so much for your time and effort on the ECC. I really appreciate it. And so I had a couple of thoughts. I obviously have not dug into the details on all this stuff as you have, but these are sort of a couple reflections for you to consider today. My first thought was just, I think it's important to focus on actions that are most likely to be transformative over time, especially when it comes to buildings in Bend. I think, where we get our energy from is obviously a big one. I'll talk about that. How we use it in buildings and then transportation stuff seem like to me to be some of the biggest sources of greenhouse gas emissions. So in particular, the building stock I think is important. And so my suggestion on what I see as the ones that are potentially most transformative are the 100% clean electricity, which is on your list to pick from. I think a home energy score is pretty important in terms of transforming building stock over time. I think support for the REACH code bill, and which I sort of understand to be part of item 7 on your list in the memo that was in the packet. But really continuing to support the REACH code bill in the next session and then eventually implementing it is going to be important. And then I think multifamily recycling is also pretty important, in particular because it's going to take policy change. And all of these are policy actions that need to happen, and I think are perhaps the ones that have the most potential to be transformative. I think the other thing that's important about each of these is some of them, like the REACH code is a good example, is something that obviously there's like another step that has to happen before the city of Bend could actually do something with that. And that is passing a bill, and it will be a priority bill from a variety of players in the upcoming short session next year. So I'm hoping that the city would continue to support that bill. And then obviously with the 100% clean, there's a whole process, I believe, that's going to have to go through with some PUC involvement. It's going to take time to figure that one out. So again, this, focusing on actions that are more likely to be transformative. The second point I would make is that just really emphasizing to the council the importance of the transportation actions that are already underway. And then if anything, we need to look at how do we accelerate those and how do we ensure rapid implementation of both the policies that are specifically talked about, but also getting actual infrastructure on the ground so it's safer for people to get out of their cars and to walk and to bike. And then the third thing is that it seems, from what I can tell, that you all are looking at these as sort of 2 buckets: the actions that are already underway, and then the actions on which the city and or the ECC would play a key lead role. I think it may be helpful for you to look at a third bucket, sort of a third category, and that's actions that other partners could play a leadership role on. And I see the environmental center where I work as a lead partner on a lot of the stuff related to waste and recycling, both on the education side and to some extent on the implementation side of multifamily recycling. Although the key issue there is there needs to be policy change made in order for a better infrastructure to be required at multifamily facilities. If we don't do that now, and as soon as possible, it just means more and more facilities are going to be harder to actually do anything there.
And Mike, you're a little over 3 minutes, so if you could just wrap up.
Okay, so that was really my last point, was just that piece about look at that third bucket, and that I think many of those ones that partners are doing will not take necessarily as much resources as might have been identified in the memo, although I'm not real familiar with how that resource allocation ranking or rating system was developed. So thanks again. Appreciate all your hard work.
All right. It doesn't look like we have any other hands raised from other participants. So, oh, just kidding. We have a call-in listener. So if you can hear us, phone number ending in 7588. If you are here to make a comment, you can press *9 and we can unmute you. Perfect time. We were about to move on, but you got in just in the nick of time.
Okay, caller, I've unmuted you, so you should be able to speak now, and you have 3 minutes to make your comment.
Hi there. This is just Barb Campbell. I am away from my computer, but I wanted to call in and listen today. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, perfect. Thanks,
Barb.
Barb, if there's something, since you're on the phone, we can promote you up to a panelist, but if you want to share something, just feel free to raise your hand later in the meeting and I can give you a chance. I'll keep an eye on that. Okay.
That's great. Thank you, Cassie. Thanks, everybody.
All right. So next we're going to move on to updates from Cassie.
Okay, so a couple of updates today. The first was that I wanted to give you an update on the work the city's going to do on the tree ordinance, because that came up in the bike rack or maybe even the agenda setting as something potentially you all wanted to start talking about in response to the comments that we've been receiving about concerns people have around trees in the community. So as we talked about last time, the city does have planned in this biennium to work on the tree code, which would look at a lot of things, not necessarily just tree preservation, but kind of understanding how we balance tree preservation with some of the other needs that we have in the community. So I did a little digging to figure out kind of what the timeline is for that and what kind of participation you all will be able to have. And what happened was that at the last council meeting, they made the decision that we have a challenge with code updates because we just are pretty staff constrained and resource constrained on being able to work on code updates. And the council has a number of code changes they want to make this biennium. So another big focus for them is looking at parking and potentially reducing parking minimums and just kind of looking at how we manage parking throughout the community. So we gave them the option of doing the parking minimums this fall and the tree code update later, or vice versa. They did decide to work on parking first. However, the council really did emphasize that they saw a lot of connection between some of the parking issues and tree issues. Like they felt like we should be able to address some of the concerns around trees in the parking code. And they also expressed that they really want to, they don't want to like push the tree issue back too far. So I don't think that they indicated that it's like a lower priority. It was just kind of a fact that they had to work on one over the other. So that's kind of where we are now. That means we don't have an exact timeline of when we'll work on the tree ordinance, except that it likely won't be this fall. It'll probably be spring of next year or later. But there will be an opportunity for this committee and probably other committees to play a role in that. So I think as far as addressing the tree issue that we've been hearing about in the community for this committee, it may make the most sense to just plan on participating in that process. It's going to kind of be like the easiest path to accomplishing something, because if you wanted to do something outside of our tree code work, probably the response is going to be like, well, we'll work through that kind of thing in the tree code. So that's kind of where we sit on that. And then a second update is that I said, you should have all seen this because I sent a test update out, but we had talked at the last meeting about trying to figure out how we can set up an email address so community members can email you all without sharing your personal email addresses publicly. So I went ahead and made an email address that's ecc@bendoregon.gov. And so what people now can email that, and then you'll all receive an email to your personal email address to that, but they shouldn't be able to see your email addresses personally. So we can move forward with that system. I haven't published it on the website yet because I just wanted to double check that everyone is comfortable with that system. So could I just get like maybe a quick Zoom hand raise if everyone, for people who are comfortable using that system, and I can go ahead and publish that on the website. Okay, perfect. That looks like everyone. So I'll go ahead and do that. I'll just double check with Peter and Tess to make sure they're okay with that too. But I think it was a good solution. And then my last update is a staffing update, a personal update from me is that I'll be taking, some of you know this already, but not all of you, is that I'll be taking maternity leave this fall. So I'm going to be out October through December. So if we were in person, you probably would have known that already, but I've been able to hide it pretty well. So we do have other staff that's going to take over kind of admin in the meetings. I think as far as running the agenda and setting the agenda, you'll have a lot of responsibilities on the chairs to to kind of make sure that you're managing yourselves and determining your discussions for each month. But we'll talk more so next meeting in September will be my last meeting with you all before I take off. So we'll talk more about kind of like a work plan for the fall for you all. And I'm working with the chairs on that. So but I wanted to share that with everyone so I didn't just disappear. Yeah. So does anyone have any questions about any of those updates before we move on with the agenda?
Just to say congratulations, Cassie.
Thank you.
Congrats.
Okay, and I think at our next meeting, I'll ask the staff person who's going to take over to come so I can introduce her to you all. She's also in the city manager's office. She is our strategic initiatives manager, Mickey Dirting, and she reports directly to Eric. So she's really in touch with the council and with the city manager and everything. So I think you'll be in good hands with her. She also has a little bit of a background in sustainability as well. So. Okay, well then I think we can move on to the next part of the agenda.
Yeah, next up is bike rack with Serena.
Yeah, so I think we've gone through this a few times now. If there's anything you guys want to add to the bike rack that would be a potential agenda item down the road that we would discuss at the end of meetings, if there's anything that you've come across personally or professionally that you feel that we should add to the list, I'll stop talking and we'll take a few seconds to let you raise your hand. Neil?
Something I think would be great to talk about is just a broader discussion of actions that we feel like are missing in the current CCAP. And one of those areas in the buildings area would be fuel choice. So specifically talking about natural gas because it's not addressed at all in the CCAP. And I think it could be a good broader discussion.
Thank you. Bill?
So I'm going to basically say the same thing as Neil. I think this committee really needs to address the possibility of an ordinance around no new natural gas hookups in new construction, both commercial and residential. I've looked at several cities. There's like more than 40 in California. And I think we at least need to discuss it, the pros and cons, the unintended issues that arise from it. But I think we got to do this. So I'm reinforcing what Neil just talked about.
Great.
So,
we both read each other's minds. Thank you, Bill. Any other topics anyone wants to bring up for potential future discussion? All right, Neil, I think we can move on.
All right, we're right on schedule. We had that scheduled for 20 minutes. So great work, team. So we're going to kind of jump into things, the meat of the agenda of actually working on and voting on our prioritizations for our CCAP recommendations to council, which I know that they are excited to start adding into their work and our work moving forward. So this is a good spot to be in. I guess I'll start with a quick reminder or overview of how this is going to look or how we're going to work through this today. So we're going to start, and Cassie, do you have the timer? Okay, so we're going to start with every committee member, and we don't have any ex officios, but all the committee members that are here are going to have a minute to make another comment to the group before we get started. And this is kind of an opportunity to kind of remind us of some of the philosophy that you're going into it, or things that you think would be important for folks to know before we actually vote. And so as it was written here, it could be advocating for a specific action, criteria that you think was really important, or things that a committee member wants to contribute. And this is really important since there's so many of us. We want to hear from everybody, and we really want to stick to that 1 minute. Then we're going to open up the voting platform called Idea Boards, which you should have gotten an email about in your ECC email for the link to that. And you will be able to go in and select 5 of the 12 actions. And we'll talk a little bit more about the details of that in a second. And then we will review that and discuss it for a good chunk of the meeting. And when we get there, we'll talk about kind of how that process will work. So that's kind of big picture perspective of how that's going to work. And so then we can still have time, just as a reminder, time-wise for everybody, we are trying to reserve at the end of our agenda time for Covey to talk about the emergency climate declaration. So are there any comments on broad process for each section? We'll actually, like when we get to it, we can talk about the details of how do you vote and those types of things. But are there any broad questions out there, Bill?
Yeah, I just had one quickie question. On the 4 transportation items that are already being, it sounds like already being acted on, I wasn't quite understanding how they fit in with this. I mean, they were in the list prior, and we've moved them outside now. And what is it that are we deciding anything on those? I know they're outside of our voting here, but what's the action on those?
Yeah, that's a great question. That was trying to balance sharing our support for those actions that are already happening within other processes at the city. So those are high priority, and were clearly high priority throughout the process up until this point. But we didn't want those to be, we wanted to share support with while still being able to take on additional work. So those will be also shared with council as high priorities and things that we want to be doing and doing aggressively. But having the rest of our actions will require separate work to be done that's not already happening.
Yeah, thank you.
And then, yeah, so let's kind of take this piece by piece. And so for this first section, we will each have the opportunity to speak for a minute. So if there's any questions on that before we get started, let me know. Otherwise, we'll put the Zoom hand up, and I will let you know the order I'm going to go in is going to be Rory first, and then Mark Buckley will be after that. And so you know when you're going to be ready. Rory, are you ready?
I am, Neil.
Great.
Yeah, this is fun going first. It was hard to think through these and prioritize. My tendency after I tried to prioritize them was I went to all the high resource ones because they seemed the most impactful. So that's what I struggled with. What sort of guided my thinking, though, was both that, like wanting to obviously pick the ones that are most impactful, but also things that I feel like the city can take the lead on as being our first recommendations that seemed important to me. So that guided which ones I chose, but tried to also have a balance between what the city will end up working on the most versus what we can support. And following up on the transportation conversation, I had similar questions as Bill. One of those 4 in particular, the transit one, I'm not positive that fits in there. I know that it's CET's wheelhouse, but I think there's a lot the city could be doing on its own. And you could say that some of our the first 12 are led by other organizations and the city supports. So that one I want to make sure we keep sight of. Thanks for the minute.
Great, Bill, is that a quick process question?
Oh, sorry, I thought I lowered my hand.
Okay, no worries. So next is Mark, and Kersey is will be after that.
Yeah, I'll just say that going into the prioritization, I wanted to think about greenhouse gas emissions as the highest priority, especially what we're seeing right now. I feel like Bend, as a relatively financially strong community, progressive, and in the path of fire, we need to show that we're willing to make real investments ourselves. So I want to make sure that we focus on actions that do have a very specific connection to greenhouse gas emissions. That said, I want to respect the expertise and research across this committee. So I want to be able to prioritize actions that are high among each of the group's priority lists. So that's how I was trying to do that. And then thinking in terms of low-hanging fruit, especially early on, both in terms of having a broad perspective, so we're touching as many different areas as possible, as well as not being too burdensome and narrow. So I'll stop there.
Perfect timing. Kersey and then Serena.
All right, so in my research, I was finding a lot about the impact of the code changes, so number 7 on our list, and realizing how outdated our current code is, and feeling like that prioritizing that for the council, one, I think could easily be supported by this council because they've already started passing some code updates with housing, and then you're able to have a positive impact for low-income housing or people who just can't afford to make those updates to their house. It's there from the beginning. So I would just like to voice my support for that update.
Great. Serena and, or sorry, I think I said Serena and then Bill. The names keep moving around. I thought this was going to be a great list, but every time you unmute it shifts.
All right, I am ready. So I think I'm repeating a little bit of what a lot of you have already said. For me, and I've said this from the beginning, I feel it's important that we obviously keep to our goal, which is greenhouse emissions, right? Reducing those, but also being able to show some validation in our work and bring about some change with low-hanging fruit, but continue to work on those long-term efforts. So that's kind of where I was guiding my thinking in terms of some long-range plans and some short key wins. And then also at the same time, as just mentioned, that code, our code policy, our code changes, you know, there's a lot that needs to be done there. And I think the sooner we work on that, the better. Thank you.
Thanks, Serena. So next is Bill and then Kelly.
So when I went through these, the first thing I really thought about is how much can the city influence the outcome of the action? And I think there's so many things in here that will rely on people making decisions that the city can't. So I wanted to make sure that any action I chose in here that the city could actually do something about. And from that, I thought about how much greenhouse gas reduction potential, because that's important. We have a goal. And then the last piece I really thought about was which ones produce tangible results, like in behavior, technology, uptake of programs, the codes that fit in within the timeline of the climate action plan. So that was kind of my priority list, and still hard to choose, but that's it.
Great. Kelly and then Covey.
Yeah, so similar to Mark and Serena, greenhouse gas emissions was my priority and my focus. I think it's also critical to spread the work across different industries to encourage diverse engagement across our community. That will help us demonstrate and achieve short-term wins that not only drive change, but also think, you know, from a community perspective, what additional impact we can have and to really further engage the community. And then Also, as discussed earlier, what can the city lead versus the state and the county? What can we contribute to, but what can we actually own and drive? So those were my considerations.
Awesome. Kavi?
All right, I took a different tack. There's two things I wanted to mention. One was in the CCAP, it mentions Bend has 809,000 metric tons of sector-based emissions, and our emissions from production of imported food, goods, and services is 871,000 metric tons. So it's 62,000 metric tons larger. That is not included in Bend's fossil fuel reduction goals, but they are a significant and meaningful part of Bend's climate impact. And so we should keep that in mind as we prioritize actions and do our work in general. Second thing was just an update that the Recycling Modernization Act was signed into law on August 6th, 2021, and it goes into effect starting January 1st. Section 20 of it requires that local governments ensure adequate space and access for collection at multifamily properties. They'll go into effect in a few years, but having it in place now will reduce the need to pay to remodel developments built between now and when that goes into effect. So similar to what Mike Riley said, and I think I'm out of time.
This timer is so great. I'm going to give a quick update from Peter, who's already kind of shared, because he's not able to be here today. He shared his actions, and he said that he selected those and they're listed, and that he's pretty sure that we wouldn't be surprised by his actions, but he really prioritized recommendations for actions that the city can influence over the next biennium that will have the greatest systemic benefit for the community, the climate, and a sustainable economy. So quick update from him. And then for me, it's hard going last because everybody, I think we're pretty much on the same page as a group, and it's hard to do this. One of the things that I really wanted to focus on while I was making these votes was thinking about recommending that action and then what needs to go with that action for the council to consider. So a lot of these are really specific and tangible, and some of them have the opportunity of being really successful, but are a pretty broad goal to begin with. So it's just a reminder for all of you that we'll have time for all of these to provide some commentary outside of just the title of the action. So then we can provide a little bit of a nuanced, this is really important, and we want to make sure that when it's implemented, it's going to be widely available to multifamily residents or LMI populations or whatever that is. So that's my time. Okay. That was rapid fire and great. We've definitely never had 10 minutes where we've heard from everybody. So props. So next, we're going to actually go into voting. So if we will share it on the screen for the recording and for attendees. But for this next section, what we're going to do is each committee member is going to have the ability to vote for 5 actions. So you're going to have 5 votes and to be able to vote for the 12 actions that we had outlined up above. So you'll have to go into your email and check the Idea Board's platform out to be able to make those votes. One of the things that we had discussed was, as a balance of options, you have 5 votes, and that can either be selecting 5 individual actions, or if there's an action that's particularly important to you, you can double vote one of those and then use and then vote for the other 3 that you're interested in. So that's 4 votes with one of them being emphasized, or 5 votes for 5 actions. Does that process make sense? Or if people want to open up the idea board before we get started, we can look at it and see if there's anything that comes up there. And for those questions, since I can't see everybody's face on another screen, you'll just have to speak up.
Neil, I have a quick question. Just to clarify our process for after this vote, we're going to then have like a group discussion and not let the vote 100% decide what we recommend. Is that correct?
Yeah, thanks. That would be an important thing to mention. So after this process, which is really important because it's hearing from everybody equally, we did want to, or heard from other folks that we wanted to reserve some time to make sure that what comes out of the matrix, if you will, jives with all of us. And we'll try to make that process, still hear from everybody in that process, but that's where we'll have most of our discussion in this meeting. Will be squaring the rectangle of what comes out of this list, and then also picking how many we are comfortable sharing with council.
Now I see 7 votes on there. Or somebody already started to vote.
I think we put Peter's votes in already, and some people are.
People are voting. I was going to say,
yep.
Peter's voting 7 times.
Can you guys see the idea of what's in my screen share right now? Is that what?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. I thought did I misunderstand? I thought we were supposed to start voting. That was me.
No, you're good. We can definitely, if there's no other structural questions, we can vote. You also, if you accidentally vote, you can remove your vote. Just no funny business, because it's all anonymous. So if you downvote somebody or put in more votes, we won't know. And Cass, we'll see how long it takes. If you are done putting your votes in, maybe raise your hand, and then that way we can know how that goes. I wish I could share music, but we'll do it in silence. Just think of Jeopardy music.
Da, 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 da. Oh. Sorry.
Neil, are we raising our hand to say we're done or that we want to share?
Raise your hand when you're done. I tried counting to see if it was a multiple of 5, and then I got lost. So
Is there a way for us to know if we already voted for an action and keep track of that?
no.
Okay.
There's a flaw in the system. I guess we could count at this point if you're not sure how many you voted for.
I just counted 45.
Okay, then that means you probably voted for it already.
Okay, I think I voted for, let me just change it because I think I voted for it twice then, by mistake.
Well, 45 would be, well, yeah, I don't know. If you're trying to change.
Is there a way to unvote?
Yeah, if you click on, oh, I thought there was.
I ended up clicking it 2 more times and it just went up more.
Okay, maybe there's not a way to unvote.
So I ended up voting for the home energy score program, but I think like 4 times by mistake. So we can just uncount 3 of the votes, probably.
Yeah.
You're trying to put your finger on the scale.
Well, then let's, if that is, Serena, were you undervoted or did you just put your hand back down?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm done.
Okay.
I thought, yeah, I
Great.
put it down.
Okay, so I think that we are all voted, and we'll just make the note that the home energy score program number should be reduced by 2, Covey? 3? How many times do you think you voted for it?
I think 3.
Okay.
Reduced by 3. I think I voted for 4 times.
Okay. So Cassie was able to change the order of it. So if you want to come back and look at the main screen, we can now see the actions ranked by the number of votes that they got. And we can also put hands down, Bill, Rory, and Covey, unless you have comments.
Could we put the home energy score program as if it's 5 instead of 8?
We can remember that when it's exported, but
okay.
So yeah, move that on the other side of those.
What I'm trying to do right now is re-put them in order in a Word document.
Okay.
And I'll account that it was 5.
Got it.
And you, we'll have this. Everybody that's logged into this has the option to export as an Excel doc as well. So we can do that as well. Okay, so we are doing that. The next step is going to be taking the top, I think we said 6 actions, but there's some that are, that there's a 3-way tie for 5th. Yeah, so we'll look at a few more than, or we'll look at 7 total. And so we can then, this next step is really going to be where we talk about those. I guess first we can talk about if this is what we expected, or if there's anything that needs to be, that doesn't sit right. And then we'll be able to talk about how many of these we want to recommend. Does that process make sense, Cassie, or should we be having those conversations at the same time?
Well, we talked about first giving everyone 1 minute again to kind of give their gut reaction. So I think maybe we should do that. So the idea is that everyone take a minute to look at the list right now. And then so that we make sure we hear from each person at least once about like just your gut reaction to the top. You said you wanted to look at the top 7, Neil?
It seemed like those were, Well, yeah, everything that got a vote of 4, 5, or 7.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's right. So just take a look at these top ones right now and just think, like, we just want to hear, like, is this a list you guys are good with? Is there something that you feel like this list does not actually reflect kind of what you want, so that we can kind of get a general understanding of like where people are at, which will allow us to kind of, I think, better move forward if we know like we're generally on the same page with this, or we feel like there's some things wrong. So take a minute to look at it and think about it. And then I'm going to see if I can, I'm going to try to do something where I can show the timer and this list at the same time, because we'll do like the 1 minute time for that next one as well.
Oh, fancy.
I learned, so it's going to take me a minute.
So for this, if you are ready to give your minute, if you want to keep thinking about it, that's fine. But why don't you raise your hand if you're ready for your minute, and that way I can keep track of who's been able to speak and who hasn't. And then Cassie, oh, you're sharing again. Whoa, we can see both. Nice work.
Thank you.
All right, let's start this time with Covey, and we'll work our way roughly backwards as far as my memory provides. So Covey, do you want to give your minute first?
Sure, I'll be happy to. So I think the list looks pretty good to me. The two things that I think I was trying to kind of force into my first minute was kind of just talking a little bit more about the Recycling Modernization Act. So it does have section 20 that requires local governments to ensure adequate space and access for collection at multifamily properties. I think it's expected to go into effect the next couple of years. So basically, I think it is a big thing if we're able to get this in earlier. We don't have to worry about remodeling or retrofitting many properties that are developed between now and when that actually goes into effect statewide. The other part for W1A, which is improving recycling at multifamily residences, there's 3 parts to it. One is creating code, the second is conducting outreach and education, and the third is kind of coordinating with partners. And it's based on what we heard also from Mike Riley and just the work the Environmental Center is doing. They have done a lot of work on the second 2 parts. So the main part that I think the city could really get done right now is creating a codes part for that, which would have a long-term impact. Thank you.
All right, next set of, this is going to be really hard for me to digest everybody's thoughts too. But next set is Kelly.
So it seems that we've got a diverse set of actions here. Obviously, you know, it's hard to say no to any of them. As those who have been in conversation with me, I think low carbon concrete is absolutely fascinating, has real potential. So it's tough to see some of these drop down a little bit, but I understand the prioritization process. And I think that we've got a wide set of initiatives that engage the community, that deal with policy, that deal with the business. So, you know, overall, I'm supportive of the prioritization that we've completed.
Great. Serena is next-ish, and then Bill.
Okay. So I'm actually fairly comfortable with what has been put out as well today. My biggest concern, I guess, if there is one, is there's a lot of highs on there, and you know that's a lot of initiatives with a lot of highs. We have one low, one medium, and I know that's not necessarily the most important thing, obviously, because we voted based on the content. But I just want to make sure we're also realistic on what can be done between our group and our partners in the city, and that's my biggest like flag, I guess, that I would have to say that my initial gut check when I read through it. But I'm happy with what people have come through. I think we've done really great with the diligence and the research we've been able to do so far. So great job, everyone.
Great. Bill, if you're ready.
Sure. Okay, so looking at those, not surprising, I think they're consistent with what people said in their 1 minute timeframes beforehand. So when I get down to those 3 items that have 4s on them, that's a toughie. But I sort of believe almost that the new incentives and revolving loan funds could be consolidated, because a revolving loan fund really is an incentive to get people to install. So, you know, we don't really have to decide between the 2 of them, I don't think. I would love to see recycling in multifamily residences too, so I'm not helping there. The other thing I wanted to say, there's those ones at the bottom about giving out information at the permitting process. That seems like sort of a no-brainer that can be done anyway. It should be done. And also the low carbon piece probably could be tested in the bidding process for projects. So I had the same feelings about that low carbon piece. That's a shame to miss it.
All right, Kersey, maybe?
I also support this list. I'm also just thinking, you know, we're gonna submit these with some notes and recommendations attached, and wanting to think of how we can include education and outreach within a lot of these. You know, who is most common to use these practices at home, who's most willing to change their business practices, their building practices. So how are we getting this information out and really using those community partners and local organizations to help us get the word out and into the community that this is happening.
Thanks for that, Mark, and then Rory.
I like that this list is diverse. I also had the big concern about all of the highs, and I had a low and medium that didn't make the cut that I had voted for because of those. And in part, I'm a little concerned that the multifamily residence one and the top vote getter, I guess I was probably one of the only people who didn't vote for it, pushing for 100% renewable in the grid, are both almost in existing actions because there is state legal or regulatory activity already at this point underway for both of those. And so the incremental contribution of the city towards those goals, almost similarly, the transportation ones in my head, given that there's already effort on transportation actions and there's already effort on renewable grid and to some extent now multifamily housing, I'd almost personally like to see some of that effort go towards accelerating one of the transportation actions, particularly the bike pedestrian one. So that's my only feedback, is I'm also worried about the high, and if there's a way to think about some of those highs where they might not be the most efficient. But thanks.
Rory?
Yeah, so I had, well, so first of all, I agree with a lot of what we all prioritize, but I had similar feedback as Mark just gave about the 100% renewable electricity. With the new legislation that has the major IOUs, investor-owned utilities in the state, need to be all clean, renewable by 2040. I wonder about the net benefit of Ben trying to push our timeline earlier. So if those IOUs are providing all the electricity in the state, if Ben let's say we get to 100% renewable in Ben by 2030, the dirty fuels that those IOUs, Pacificor and others, are producing will still be sold in Oregon and just somewhere else, right? So I question putting in the time and effort for Ben to get there first when the net impact to me is questionable. And then finally, smaller housing incentives was a big one for me. To me, that's a huge way to promote energy efficiency and just reducing energy use in general. So I think there's more we could do there.
All right, I'll go. How the actions that the city is taking versus what's happening at the state level is a structural question that I think is really hard to figure out. So the the marginal gains. The inner economist in me loved that conversation, Mark. But this is just hard. I think that we have a good list here, and I think that they are relatively actionable. And as far as I understand, with the 100% renewable bill that was passed, part of that was allowing cities to act earlier and have it actually be additional and not just transferred on to. That's anytime you're doing something like that, you want to make sure that it's not just being transferred on to another part of your area or contributing to somebody else is already committed to goals. So I think that would be a asterisk. Okay, did I miss somebody in their responses? No. Okay, so we have this that round robin section, and now we're going to move into more of a floor discussion to determine which 3 to 6, depending on how much work they're going to be, actions can be recommended to council. It is going to be based on overall workload the committee thinks we can manage within the biennium, and staff input on reasonable workload for staff and council. So with that, Cassie, maybe do you have any feedback up until this point of kind of what we've been talking about, and in terms of effort and breadth of the work that's being proposed?
I don't think so, other than the fact that, you know, we can't go with all 7 of these, particularly because they're all high. So if you guys want to choose all high ones, we do need to stick more towards like 3 to 4. But I think we can kind of talk about that. And I think is the way I was thinking we could go through the rest of this is, first, we'll just kind of hear some discussion, but not similar to how we did the working groups. Like if you guys start kind of switching the order of priority around a little bit, I'll try to capture that in real time. So, so that we can all kind of keep track with like where we're at through the discussion. And then the other thing I think I'll do is create like a notes column here, because it sounds like we have there's a lot of nuance to a lot of these actions. Like, what does this action mean to the group? And what do we want to communicate to the council next month that this action would mean? Or we want to be sure certain things are factored in. So that is going to be kind of part of our immediate next step. So as you guys have some of those thoughts, I'll jot them down as notes. And then the next steps, just to give you context, was that we're going to go to the stewardship subcommittee in September, but not before our next meeting. So for our next meeting, I'm going to work with the chairs to define like, okay, this is the list of 4 to 5 to 6. This is kind of a council action that would be needed in this biennium. This is a committee / staff, you know, item that we would be working on in the meantime to further define. So whatever notes you guys kind of share, I think we'll try to fold into that, and then we'll come back to you all with that more thorough kind of layout of what we're recommending. So by the end of today, we definitely need to pick whatever those top 3 to 6 are, and then get input from you all on kind of what that means to you all. And then we'll kind of make sure we're all on the same page about it at the next meeting.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So I think, as Bill mentioned, regarding kind of combining the number 7 and 8 there on the Excel, is that something that would make sense? Because it does make sense to me. I don't know if that's something that's possible.
I would prefer not to combine further at this point. I think that, like, I understand because the revolving loan fund is an incentive, but we are calling out a specific type of incentive that's been discussed very specifically since the beginning of the CCAP. Like, it was discussed as like a really specific incentive that we don't want to lose. And it was voted very highly, you know, in addition to the other one. So I would prefer that we keep it because we've already consolidated a ton. And like I've shared before, the more we consolidate here, the farther we actually are from making any of these things happen, because we have to have those discussions to re-pull them apart. And part of the reason there's some that overlap is because in the development of the CCAP, we attempted to pull those apart a little more so that we could just do it. So if you all decide a revolving loan fund is a high priority for you, we can move faster on that if we decide that now, rather than saying we want to start with incentives and then take a long process to decide that incentive is a revolving loan fund. So that work was intentionally done to separate them out. That's why I don't really like consolidating beyond what I've done.
Mark?
Yeah, I was actually going to comment on that I think that they are quite different, and that the revolving loan fund does have a different function than a typical straightforward incentive. And the long-term financial implications for the city are quite different, especially if the fund is successful in recouping the funds that were loaned out over time. So I do think those should be kept separate. The other thing was, I know sometimes in this kind of voting system, you might consolidate the list and then revote and see how, say, some of those votes from the lower set would be allocated. I don't know if that's necessary, if we needed to find a way to prioritize or even just have some voting among the fours. To some extent with two highs, maybe the reality is the sevens and the fives sort of take it all as it is, but just checking if was there any discussion about sort of a formal process of voting again?
We hadn't specifically called out voting. I guess this would be a third time. But if that seems like that would be helpful for the group, like if we're having discussion and kind of going back and forth and then doing that is definitely an option if folks think that would be helpful. Bill, do you have another question?
Yeah, I was thinking about, so I understand what you're saying, Cassie, about consolidating, and you're right. It just makes it an even bigger action when you stick the two together. But then I guess I would be curious to hear, as we have this discussion, if those are two that are in the running, which one we think has the higher efficacy on getting projects done. And there's incentives out there by Energy Trust and Central Electric and a few and others. But is that got a bigger bang trying to come up with incremental incentives over what's out there versus creating a loan fund? So I'd be curious to hear what people's comments are on that. The other thing I thought about, so 100% renewable is pretty important, I think, to still do, even though the process is happening at the state level. But it could be lower effort than high, or it could be high if we have to go out and ally with other cities and come up with a 100% green option above and beyond what's going to be provided in the renewable portfolio from the utilities. But it doesn't have to be, might not be high, is my point, I guess.
I'll piggyback off of that and then go to you, Covey. I think that one of the recommendations that I might make for some of these actions, and I don't think that we're really at this point now ready for this, but one of the actions that we might give all of these is providing a timeline of what work is going to actually look like on these different actions in the biennium, or if it's a project that's going to stretch longer than the next 2 years. Because I think looking at this list, there's a couple of these that we can prioritize highly, but work might not actually start for a year or two, or not in any significant manner. And so, like for example, the code update process and advancing energy efficiency in codes, that's one that I know it's not listed as a high action item, but if we're actually having to do a campaign and adopt a reach code, that would become a larger work plan. And so some of these might be able to start as lower intensity and then gain in intensity over time, and other ones we really need to put a lot of effort into early. So I think that kind of fits with that, or we're waiting on legislation to figure out exactly what the step the cities should be taking. Like with multifamily, like with what's listed here as row 9 and row 3. So I think we can think about that a little bit, and I'm comfortable biting off a bigger chunk, knowing that a couple of these will probably be a wait and see for the next year or so before we would really be putting a lot of work in earnest. Covey?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to those points. I think that's important, what Bill and Neil, both of you mentioned. And I think in line with that, I just wanted to kind of bring it up to the committee as well in terms of number 9 for improving recycling at multifamily residences. Like I mentioned, the action itself has 3 sentences that are 3 parts to it. And just talking to the Environmental Center and some of the work they've already done in terms of pilot project and some of the plans they have for next year or two. I wonder if that is something that can also be taken into consideration. That right now it's put as a high resource, but if we do focus more on just the codes part of it, does that change the effort level? I know Cassie mentioned that there is some resource limitations in terms of code changes at the city level to also consider, but just another thing to just put out if a partnership can reduce the resource needs for that action as well. And that applies to other actions as well.
I'm muted. Are there other comments on process? I haven't been keeping super good track of who's talked yet, but are there other process comments or ideas of how we might move forward? Kersey, Kelly, Serena? Not
I like the vote idea. I think we all seem to be on similar pages, so that might help.
So what would it be helpful to I guess like clarify any questions about these actions or the resources needed to do them, and then we could vote for the 4 or 5 that we think make the top list. Do we think we'd get with? Is that what you're kind of talking about, Kersey?
Mary, you look like you're gonna say?
Well, I was trying to listen to what the intent of number 3 is. I'm trying to figure out how these translate into which departments would need to help implement them if they're your high priority. And if they're not a high priority, then I don't have to worry about it. But like, is number 3 are franchise agreements? Like, who would be providing renewable electricity through the grid? Like, what do we have? Yeah.
Number 3, Mary, is one that it's probably worth like a whole separate conversation with you and I to kind of explain it. But part of the challenge with that one, which has been reflected a little bit in the comments, is that there is basically, based on a law that just passed in this last session, there's a pathway for a city to opt into 100% renewable electricity that the utility would provide. As far as departments, it would probably be like city manager, legal.
Yep.
Probably so the bulk of it. Yeah.
So you would be recommending through that legislation to have that, for the city to take that on as a priority, although it hasn't been one of the council priorities that we would put the resources towards it. That would be so I guess I'm trying to just always look at what departments, how much work, and what does it take away from the council priorities that are always adopted. So there, I would just encourage you to be like, yeah, really sure that this one is a high priority. Because council just had this discussion at that last quarterly meeting that was what Cassie was talking about with the tree code. If you want to talk about parking, something has to come off. staff are spread so thin, and this council is so ambitious, and we have a lot on our plates, and we don't just like, who's going to write codes, who's going to negotiate. So it's not that they're not great ideas, it's just council then has to say something comes off.
But we did it, and it might be again a discussion for another time, Mary, but we do have a placeholder in the council goals for these actions and a budget. And the challenge that we've had internally is because we didn't pick those actions in advance. We don't know what departments they implicate, but that's been a discussion we've been very transparent about for a long time. So it is included as a priority. I understand the practical implications of that, but that's why we need to get through this decision now, and then that will be part of the discussion we have with council and the stewardship subcommittee.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Cassie. Kelly, you raise your hand.
Yeah, so the struggle that I have is I feel like we're prioritizing, but we have missing data, right? So there's a budget, but we don't know what each of these actions cost. Understanding what the potential emissions impact is for each of them, having those data points aligned with, in this spreadsheet, I think would help me feel more confident. But absent that data, we're trying to make the best decisions possible today. I guess my question would be, once we have more information, is there that flexibility or that opportunity to realign, potentially reprioritize? What does that process look like in the future?
Yeah, I think certainly. I mean, like we kind of said, it's all just kind of a living thing. And one of the reasons for prioritizing now is because we don't know that information until we start working on it. And we can't figure out those things until we have just a couple of things to work on. So and that's kind of the nice thing about having this whole list of 12. If we start working through the first one or two and it's like, whoa, actually understanding the true implications of that's not the right move for us, then we can pivot to something else. But we kind of just have to start with something. And I think that also speaks to kind of what Neil was saying, like some of these might off the bat start as easy, small things, but as we get into them, they evolve into something larger and vice versa. So you can almost think of it as like, what do you want to start really diving into? And, that we can spend some of the budget that we have to get to that. But yeah, there's definitely a lot to figure out still.
Bill?
Well, so I appreciate the comments about, resources and budget, both. But it seems like this committee is recommending to the council, and the council can then decide whether or not that there actually is bandwidth to do a particular action within a certain amount of it in a certain time frame. I feel like for a number 3, well, it's exactly one thing that we do need to pursue. It has everything.
Am I the only one Bill is getting stuck for?
Yeah, he's cutting in and out for me too.
Sorry, you cut
Bill,
out.
We lost like most of parts of what you said in the last minute or so.
Oh, okay. No, so I don't know what you got, but I'll try to summarize. Basically, I understand and I appreciate the fact that we got to fall within the existing resources and budget, but I think this one's a really important one because it's fundamental and a baseline for many of the other actions, including some of the transportation ones. And so I'm hoping that even though we recommend it as a committee, as a first one, that doesn't mean that the council would have to. They could say, we don't have the time or resources to do this one, let's try a different one. And that's their responsibility. But I don't think that should impact our decision that this is an important one for the city to pursue, because I think it is.
And that will be part of the discussion when we talk with the council. The purpose of checking in with the council now before we start working on these things is to say, that I want to outline what the council actions are and what the staff work would be for that meeting. So we can say, this is what it would take. And the council stewardship subcommittee will have an opportunity at that point to say, you know, we understand this is a priority, but given the other things we have going on, we just don't think we have capacity to do that. So that is like a potential outcome of it. So I think for Mary too, that's kind of where we'll at least start that discussion around, you know, realistically. So knowing we carved out space for these priorities, but also knowing we have a work plan that's really full, we'll get there. You know, they will have the ultimate decision in what we can kind of move forward with. And that's why we're going to talk with them next month. So I think Bill is right too. It's like if maybe it's best for you all to just say, I want you to take into account the workload, but if there's something that's really important to you, you don't necessarily need to just assume, you know, we can let the council kind of determine that if that's something that we're willing to take on or not.
Yeah, I think
into your decision, because obviously if you do, if it's clear that the list is too much for us to do, then they might start pulling stuff off. So it's kind of being strategic in that way.
Mark?
Can we show our prioritization in a more comprehensive way where obviously they can see all the actions, but do we want to show all 12 and say that we narrowed from this 12 to this list that we have prioritized in this way, so they do see our weighting and maybe not even necessarily go a lot farther than we currently have, at least with this top set?
I think it would be better to keep it a more like targeted, specific recommendation if we are to move forward quickly, just because I think if they see all 12, they're gonna have all the same questions that you all have had when you look at this list. And they're really looking for you all to help them understand. So I think they're relying on you to take the list of 12 and say, this is really what's most important, and not kind of put that on them.
Yeah, I guess what I was saying is maybe show the 12 ranked and really make the top potentially 4 in this case pop out, because those are the ones that did have the highest votes, and then have the rest, you know, even sort of give our own, emphasize those 4, but then show that we also saw these others. If these first 4 are too expensive or infeasible, this is sort of the order that we see moving forward beyond those.
Yeah, I think that would we can maybe say like, these are the top 4, these are the other things that were considered, but I do think the focus should really be on these are the top 4, and only get to the others if they're like, well, none of those 4 will work, so what else can we do? That's when I think we would dive into the others, just because to keep the conversation focused.
Kavi and then Rory.
So just a quick clarifying, I guess, question based on what you mentioned, Cassie, and my understanding of the resource part of this in terms of discussions with council, is if we think there's capacity for 4, can we, I don't know if this is what you were saying, but can we overshoot and include like 6 or 7 and then have them basically send them in a rank? So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then they can decide based on the resource how many of them would be possible, or is that putting too much work on like, is that not the right way to do it?
I just think you guys are the subject matter experts. So I do believe they're looking for you to come up with that. So if you give them a long list of 7 and we say you need to pick from here, they're going to be making that decision based on less information than even you all have. They would my guess is that they would probably ask the staff to then say, okay, which of these 4, you know, like make that decision. So we're trying to give you guys the opportunity to make the decision, and because that's kind of the point. Otherwise, you know, we can, but they have less information about it all than you. So I'm having a hard time seeing how, if you all can't choose, they would be able to choose. But I understand part of it is if they say no to some of the top ones, then you want to get ahead of that.
And I just want to maybe, I don't think I explained it well, so let me just clarify. So maybe I guess we would choose a priority and the rank of them, of the top 7, or 6 or whatever number we choose. So it's not that we're putting it on them, but basically we don't, because as we mentioned, we don't really know the exact resource needs, and some of it, like you said, we will find out. But the city staff and the, would have a better idea of the resource parts of it, of how much of that would be feasible. So would it be possible to provide a larger list and then advocate for getting as many of them done as possible? And then that way they know exactly which order we want them to do them in, and just go as low as possible. Does that make sense? So it's not that we're putting the prioritization for them, but because they have a better understanding, city staff and city council has a better understanding of the resource part of it, which we don't, they would be able to choose how many of those ones we recommend they can do.
Yeah, we could definitely do something like that if you just want to rank them. I still think for the presentation purpose, it'd be better to pick fewer because there's a lot of info to get through all of them. So I think whichever ones you all choose to highlight, I think there will still be if you do it that way, I think you can assume that your top 4 will be your official recommendation, and then your other 3 will be like the others. The resources as listed are what the city staff, and given our council load, that's the assumption of that resource list. So that wouldn't change. But if you want to show more, knowing you can't do them all, that's fine. I'm just not super sure, I guess, what it accomplishes that's different than just picking a couple and being more focused with it. But we can do it that way if you guys aren't comfortable focusing in more.
And I'll just add too that this is maybe different than a temporary committee that's making a recommendation and moving on. And we'll be continuing to work with the city and staff on these actions ourselves. And so if we go through that timeline process with one of these and realize that there's not a lot of action and we want to be doing something else in this area, then if there's capacity, we still have this as kind of our living document that we can operate off of as a committee to push for things to happen in different ways in different orders. Rory and then Bill, and just a time check, we have about 17 more minutes before we have to wrap this up.
I think we should basically do what Cassie's saying right now and just commit to picking 3 or 4 right now. It's going to be hard, but we got to make progress. This is this biennium, and with what Neil just said, we'll come back to all these eventually, but I think we can do it. And I wanted to dig in just a little more on the 100% renewable electricity. Neil, I was intrigued what you told me, which I didn't know this about the bill, that if a city chooses to do this before 2040, then it's not allowed to cause a negative impact to another city, right? So Pacific Core, it sounds like, can't push the burden of dirty energy elsewhere. That is important to me. And if it causes, say, Pacific Core to get to 100% renewable energy in Oregon by 2039 instead of 2040, then that's a meaningful thing that would make it worth it in my mind. But I would want to be sure, again, that there would be actual net benefit by 2040 of the city of Bend doing this. And maybe it's leading by example. If we do it, then maybe other cities will as well. And that causes Pacific Core to be able to meet its goal by 2035. That obviously would be huge. So, maybe I should have studied this more before this meeting to learn that aspect of that bill. But if anyone can help us with that, I would be anxious to hear it.
Yeah, and maybe that can be in our notes for that, is just making sure that any, with the recognition of where House Bill 2021 is, and that any actions would both happen on a timeline and in a way that that is truly additional and would have an impact prior to that regulatory requirement, as opposed to, because I think if it was we can do this in 2039, then we would all not have this prioritized where it is. So I think we can give that caveat. I
can share a little. I know a little bit more about.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That and the idea is that there's that Pacific Power will get to renewable by 2040. We can go further faster if we would like. And by further faster, that means we can require that it's fully additional, so we don't have the issue of it being, basically it's like customizable to the community. So we can say it needs to be fully additional. We can say things like, we want our electricity to only come from in-state resources, or we want our electricity, we can like define where we want it to come from. That's kind of what the program's intended to do. So it's a good fit for communities who don't necessarily feel like even the 100% renewable that Pacific Power will get to in 2040, it might not meet their goals. So some communities are using it as a way to say, to integrate like more like local projects that can also serve as resiliency projects. So we want 10% of our electricity to come from in-pipe hydro projects in this region of Oregon. So it basically just allows you to customize your electricity in the way that the regular regulation will not. The biggest challenge that we have right now is that they passed the law. They have not yet defined the mechanism through which the PUC and the utilities and the cities will work together. And I know from conversations with the PUC and some others that they haven't defined that. They're still like working on defining that for themselves. So it's possible that we're looking at like a rulemaking process for the community green tariff, which could be a year or two really. So I do think that one, and this one, it's like shifting under our feet as we speak. But it does seem like, so there's this potential for it to do something really meaningful if that's all important to us, but likely it's not something we could work on. We could start conversations in the community about what do we care about, because it would be a big community conversation too. But the actual like action, which would involve a city like fully, that might be a couple of years out while the regulatory authorities work through like all of those pieces.
That's helpful. Thank you, Cassie.
All right, Bill. And then I think we're going to have to start making some decisions about how we want to decide on this.
Yeah. Well, I was just one last. Yeah. I think moving to maybe another second vote might be good, where we take the top those top ones there, and you get to pick 5 or something in the same process, something, or 6. And I think it is our responsibility to make those, to come up with a list that's prioritized like that, or at least all giving the ones that we think the city should work on. But I would advocate that we at least include 5 of them, or maybe even 6. But there's that. The rulemaking piece that you were mentioning, Kathy, that's clearly a piece that would be what the city would do, is be a participant in that rulemaking, and that's a piece of that work. So anyway, I would recommend, given the time constraints, that we try to come up with some kind of process to narrow it down to 5 or 6, and then we can discuss that.
And I'm comfortable to, I guess, thinking about it a little bit more. If you guys want to pick more like 6, even if they're high, I'm comfortable with that. And then we can just make sure that that'll give me a little time to think about it from a staffing perspective. And I can kind of think through timelines before our next meeting, how those fit together. And then we can just plan on asking the stewardship subcommittee, like, we can say these are the top 4, but these are the other 2. We can basically try to build that in a little bit. The point I was trying to make is that this is your opportunity for you guys to shape that. So I just want to make sure, you guys are using that so that they don't come back, if you leave it too open and then they come back with a list that you don't agree with necessarily, like, this is your opportunity to kind of assert what your priorities are. So that's kind of why I was leaning heavily into that. But I think if we want to pick 6, and then that will give me a little time to look at the 6 and really think about the resource needs with a little bit more of a fine-tooth comb, then that would be okay.
Well, we currently have a list of 7. So maybe we could take either some conversation or vote just to propose which we can take off of the list for now. If that works.
Maybe also just voting list they used before, and just everybody picks their top and work
Yeah,
that way.
we can definitely do that. Cassie, can you
get us closer?
Do we need a new link?
Well, I'm trying to figure out, I wish there was a way I could.
You can delete the ones that are on there once it's exported.
Yeah, I can delete the ones we don't want to look at. I wish there was a way to reset them all to 0. I could like set them all to 10 so that we like.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why don't you, while Cassie's working on that, let's have another, it doesn't need to be everyone round robin, but if people have any like quick comments or questions on if that would be helpful. Covey.
I had a quick question regarding number 7 and 8, and I think Bill asked this earlier. Do we have any information on which one would be more impactful?
I think from our group, or from the energy efficiency in buildings, our group was had kind of recognized that this is a space where there's something already existing. There already are some incentives. And so this is really a like, where can the city jump in and improve this? So it's not as clearly defined. The revolving loan fund is something that is like very clearly defined as a new program. And I'm seeing Bill nod his head.
That's well said. The other one's kind of nebulous, but there's stuff.
And that could be something that we develop over time. It's an existing goal, and all of the existing goals mean that progress can be made on them when opportunities arise, because all of these actions have been voted on by council as things that the city should do. So if some amazing idea presents itself in terms of an incentive opportunity through another process at the city, they kind of already have the blessing of the CCAP. Rory?
Yeah, just quick comment on the home energy score. I just want to make sure we're eyes wide open about the controversy that one has garnered in the past. So it comes with a little baggage, right? People will remember what happened when that was considered, whenever that was a year or two ago. Not saying we shouldn't do it. I actually think we should. I think it's very important. Just want to make sure everyone remembers that and what we might be getting ourselves into again.
Okay, so Covey, and then just we have this open now, so if you can find that link again, then what we would be doing is, I guess it's an open question, but voting for what we think are maybe our top, should we vote for what we are actually going to propose to council of 5 or 6, or should we just vote for our top ones and then figure out where that lands things? Covey, go ahead.
I just had a quick response to Rory's comment. If my understanding was correct, I think the language was softened as part of that in the CCAP. So I don't know if that's still true, but I think it went from being kind of like a mandate to a recommendation or guidance. Is that correct? If anyone can correct me.
Are you asking about the home energy score program? What changed was that the recommendation originally was that we would do a mandatory time of sale, time of listing home energy score program similar to what was in the city of Portland. What was adopted was that we would develop some kind of home energy score program, that leaving it open to that may be a voluntary program, it may be a mandatory program, it could be a pilot program. So the difference is that we'd have to do like much more of a process before enacting anything. Like if we knew we could move forward with if we knew that what was adopted was a mandatory program, we can move more quickly into like, okay, let's develop an ordinance and make it happen. where what we'll do now with the current CCAP is we'll have to do more of a big stakeholder engagement process and look at these different options, look at the pros and cons of each of those options, probably have a conversation with council or two, and then decide which type we want to move forward with. So kind of like peeled it back a little bit and committed us to more of a public engagement process before deciding what to move forward with.
It's not mandatory. Is it even gonna work?
Well, I think part of the discussion that we would have during that process would be the pros and cons of each. So, I mean, there was a discussion. I think Rory was smart to point that out. There was a lot of discussion about it a few years ago. So, yeah.
But that is helpful, Cassie. So basically, if it's decided and it looks like mandatory is the most effective, and then that's still an option. It's not like it's taken off the table completely, is what I'm getting from what you're saying.
Yeah, my interpretation was that it was open.
Okay. And does that, not to ask many questions on this, but does that change that with the new council? Is that something we still would have to go through all of that, or with the new council, is there a way to kind of have it be refocused, or you don't think that's possible?
That's a discussion I'd probably want to have with I don't know exactly, but it was included in the resolution, so I don't know to what extent we can change the intent of previous councils. Mary probably knows.
Yeah, it could be changed, but they'd have to change it.
Yeah.
It's binding on the city unless and until council changes it.
Okay, that's helpful.
All right, Bill, and then we'll go on to our second round of voting.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest you can put us on the spot and say choose 5, because then that makes us have to.
Yeah.
And we're going to still get a spread out of it because people are going to vote different. But if we choose 6, we're going to basically get most of them.
Totally.
So,
yeah.
Shall we go for 5?
Are there any objections to voting for 5? Okay. Everybody hop in and vote for 5.
Oh.
And do we only have single votes this time, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't hear anybody yelling, so yes. And no one's allowed to try to play the diplomat and make all of the scores even. That's not helpful. All right, who's still working on their votes?
I have one last vote to cast.
Okay.
Be done momentarily.
Me too.
Okay, no worries.
I'm done.
All right. Well, it looks like we have a natural break at 5, which I think is kind of what our original guidance had been. that would mean that we are putting emphasis on these to the start of the work that the committee's proposing to council, and that we both have the capacity as a committee to support this, and we have a lot of information, so we don't have to go through this process again for figuring out how additional work can happen, both for the additional actions on this list and on the other list of prioritized actions, that full list of 12, and further down, and in addition to that, the transportation ones. Does that, I think that this is something that we're probably going to want a council vote on, or not a council vote, a committee vote on. Is there any discussion beyond those top 5 actions that we have listed right here, being our recommendation to council? Covey?
I was just wondering, coming back to kind of Cassie's earlier statement about potentially choosing 6 at this point, and then looking at the resource needs, could we just select one of the 2 that are tied right now and see if we can also include that as a number 6, just to be able to have 6 that can be considered? Is that something the committee would be up to?
I'll leave that open if somebody has a strong opinion on whether we're including multifamily recycling or not. I'm assuming that that's the recommendation that's being proposed unofficially by Covey.
Covey, it pains me very much because I want us to do it all, but I kind of think we should keep it short.
I'm with Covey. I think we should include it.
I guess I would say the same. I think it doesn't hurt. It isn't gonna hurt anything. But if you drop it off, it'll never get mentioned again. It'll fall away, and we'll have to bring it back some future date. But the council can decide or not whether they think that's important. I mean, I think we've narrowed it down from a gigantic list of actions, and we got it to 12, and now we got it to 6. I think that's not terrible.
We have the ability to add notes as well to what we're recommending, and I can say that this area is an area that there is a lot of partner work and support on. So mentioning that action is partially happening through the Environmental Center and waste haulers is a kind of an easy recommendation without a huge commitment. So I'm comfortable with it. Bill.
I think sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to make a motion, but I think we need to hear whatever your comment was before I do.
Well, I was just going to say, I think what might work is kind of like a middle ground of like this whole process is move forward with the top 5 as your recommendation. And then kind of like Mark was proposing, maybe we show them all 12 so they see the other options. It's kind of like, these are the top 5 that are the most important. These are 2 other highly important ones. So we'll talk about that with the council. So then if they're looking at the list and they're like, oh yeah, actually multifamily recycling is super important to me, then it'll kind of allow us to elevate those ones still, but it's easier to show them like 2 alternatives rather than what I was concerned about was showing them a list of like 7 to 8 alternatives is a little too much information. So if we say, these are the top 5, here's like 2 alternatives that the committee also really prioritizes, I think that might be a good way to do it. And knowing that these are your top with a kind of a potential cutoff at that 5, it'll give me time to think over the next month and come back to you at our next meeting with kind of a better idea on how to approach that messaging. But that's kind of, I'm just thinking aloud a little bit to you also kind of, so we can see how we can incorporate those.
Can you, Cassie, put that into some words we can put into a motion?
I would just say that maybe the motion should just be voting for this. I was going to say potentially just making the motion that this is like your ranking of these top actions and that these are the ones you want to move forward with. I don't know. Does that feel okay to people, or would you prefer to vote?
So we
these are the top
do
five.
5 and then alternatives. Thought that's what you were suggesting. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe we should do it that specifically. I'm kind of thinking aloud, so that's why I'm struggling a little bit because I'm trying to just kind of problem solve it. So, Kavi, did you have an idea on that?
Well, I had a question too, and I don't want to continue to be the advocate for this one action, but I wonder, because it sounds like you're saying you'll have 5 actions, we'll have 2 afterwards, and then we'll have like another 6 or 5 afterwards that are also kind of part of the 12 that we decided on. And I just wonder if we could just have, would it be simpler just to see if the committee is open to having the multifamily recycling as a 6th option, and then having the 6 and then just having the rest that were part of the top 12, if there's enough committee support. So if we could do a motion for that and see if it passes or not, and then based on that go to 5, would that be something that would be possible?
It's possible because I'm going to make that motion. I'm going to make it that way. And then we can decide whether we can vote on it. And if that isn't what we want to do, we'll come back and amend it. So I'm gonna move that we recommend the top 6 items that we just discussed. So all the way through improve recycling. And those are, so I'm gonna recommend that we approve those, or that we recommend those to City Council as what we do. We got to come up, that isn't a good wording. So the best thing to do usually is to come up with the wording, then you make the motion. But I think we should do the top 6 of these. Not have a bunch of other alternatives and also rans and honorable mentions. And
Okay, so I'm hearing Bill's proposal as a motion to recommend to council the 6 items that we have listed here through multifamily residences as the prioritized actions that we want, that as the prioritized actions being presented to the City Council subcommittee.
Yeah.
I'll second the motion.
That's a good description.
Discussion on that proposal.
Are we going to show that we scored the other items higher? Do we want to show that? I guess I'm thinking, because there's a little bit of dilution effect, of course. Oh, sorry, I know I jumped in there.
I think that's a good question. Rory?
Actually, similar question. I don't know if I'll vote in favor of the motion because our other incentives for renewables and energy scored just as high, and it seems arbitrary to pick one and not the other when we have rated them equally.
I think that was part of my question, was if that was part of the motion, would be to vote the recycling one higher as the 6th one, if we were still sticking to the 6 that we had talked about earlier. So since we had 5 and we have 2 tied for number 6, the motion would be to choose recycling as number 6. I don't know if that's something I should bring to a motion at this time.
That is what the motion is. So we have chosen the motion that I made did not include creating new incentives. So somebody can amend that and say we should. I mean, if you think there's something in there to amend that, then make the amendment and we'll vote on the amendment.
So I guess the alternative that we have already discussed was having the recommendation be, so that the current motion is the top 5, the vote getters of 14 plus, and then the multifamily recycling being the 6th. The other motion that wasn't a motion, the other idea that was expressed was voting for the 5 priorities plus having these other two listed as our kind of highest additional actions in reserve. So that both of those have been discussed, but one was created as a motion.
And if I can just add something to clarify, maybe I have a misunderstanding of it. I thought coming into the exercise, we decided we would choose 6 priorities, and then we were voting from 7 to choose the 6. Because we had a tie, it seemed that we were changing it to 5, which also kind of keeping resource needs in mind. So I feel like we were already on a pathway to select 6. So a motion to, we can see as a committee if there's a motion to support recycling as number 6 and keep the 6 existing structure of 6 criteria or 6 actions, or we're switching to 5, because I feel like we need a motion for that too. I don't know if that's correct.
You can, probably the simplest, there's 2 simple ways. We can vote on the motion as stated. If it doesn't pass, then we can try the other way. Or you can make an amendment to change to make the change to include, to do 5 plus the 2 alternatives. That's an amendment, and we'd have to just decide which way. If we chose that, then that's what we're going to vote on first, and then we'll vote on the overall. We'll have 2 votes if we do that. Well, we got 2 votes anyway. So which way do you want to go, Neil?
I guess I'd like to hear if Kersey or Kelly have any comment on the it's not being an official amendment, but Rory's discussion of the alternative option.
I'm in favor of including 6. So I'm wanting to vote on that motion.
Same for me.
Okay. So it seems like the proposal is more than just an arbitrary decision, but that we're intentionally selecting that as the 6th, which is different than just than them being equally weighted, because I don't think everyone got far enough down on the list to select that. Does that work for that discussion item, Rory, before we vote?
Yeah, happy to vote on it.
Okay.
I looking back at our memo, we said we choose 3 to 6. I'm a big fan of keeping it short. There's so much else we're going to have on our plates in the next 2 years, including all the transportation stuff, which is high in the back of my mind. So I would like to be on the lower end of 3 to 6 for what we're really going to focus and prioritize on. But happy to vote on it and follow the will of my fellow committee members.
Great, and we still have the opportunity to provide comment and notes on these actions. So with that, are there any other discussion items before we take a group vote on the proposed action, which is the one mentioning these 6 that we've been talking about? Okay, not seeing any other discussion. Raise your Zoom hand in support of Bill's motion. I'll say kind of the group's motion.
It's the group's once it gets seconded.
That's true. Okay, so I see 5 Zoom hands of the 7 people present. Am I reading that right with Mark and Rory? Okay. So
You should probably ask for officially for nay votes versus abstentions.
Okay. So not using Zoom hands, is that what you're saying, Bill, since it's not a unanimous vote?
Well, yes, we need to know how the other 2 people voted, whether they're abstaining, whether they're saying no.
Great. So Covey, yay, nay, or abstain?
I think he meant only the people who didn't vote.
Only the people that didn't, yeah. It's like, you've got the ayes,
I gotcha.
You don't have the nays.
Okay, perfect. So for Rory, are you a yay, nay, or abstain?
Nay.
And then Mark, are you a yay, nay, or abstain?
Nay.
Okay.
Simple.
We did it, I think. We don't have a ton of time left. Covey, do you want to, we had reserved 20 minutes, but didn't get to it. Do you want to start our conversation about the climate emergency declaration?
Yeah, I'm happy to, but since we have 3 minutes, are there any other business items after that? I can always push it back to the next meeting if that's, since that's what I think time-wise we have.
This was the last item on the agenda.
Okay, I can start then. And let me just share my screen.
Are we going to be able to do a fair treatment of this and like?
Well,
Yeah, we'll just start a discussion.
Yeah, Cody, if you want to just kind of define it, define what it is really briefly, so that we can end on time today, and then tee us up for a further discussion we'll have next week.
Sure. So basically, a climate emergency declaration resolution is something that has been passed in many cities, states, nations, and jurisdictions across the world. And so I have a very brief presentation with some information on it. I'm just going to go on some of the top things. So there's 2 cities in Oregon that have already passed it, Milwaukee and Portland.
Hey, Covey, sorry to jump in, but we're not seeing your screen presentation. We're seeing an Excel spreadsheet. There we go.
Okay. Deal monitors. Okay. Thanks for letting me know, Rory. So I guess the main thing is there's many cities that have passed this resolution. The resolution usually has a pretty strong wording in terms of making sure it's clear that there is a climate emergency going on. So it declares it at a city level. And then it allows, there's 2 parts to it, basically allows actions that follow that. So it's usually broken down into kind of whereas and then resolved, just like any other resolution, I guess, of the city. Currently, Bend is not part of this, which includes 2,011 jurisdictions and local governments in 34 countries, covering 1 billion people internationally. And I think there's an opportunity for Bend to join this this movement as well. So I have more information, but I think we might be out of time for this. Seems like I still have a minute. So I'll just back up a little bit. This was the current resolution that was passed at the city level that started the process for the CASC and for the CCAP. And the wording, as you can see, is pretty wordy and not very clear. And this is the resolution that was passed this city of Milwaukee that endorses the Declaration of Climate Emergency and emergency mobilization effort to restore a safe climate. Sorry, I kind of like jumped around, so I'm trying to figure out what else I need to cover here.
No, I know we gave you a very
it may make more sense since we're at time. It may make more sense to just
talk about it
next meeting, so that because at this point we wouldn't even have time for reactions, I don't think, from people, and I want to try to keep us on time. Is that do others agree with that?
Yeah. I was going to say, I think this can be also part of our homework in a memo in the next meeting packet. If you want to work with us to put a little bit more of kind of the details that you had in your presentation, then I think we can be ready for some more conversation and questions. So this is teed up as an info or more of an action item in the future.
That sounds.
I was just going to ask if we could share we can review the presentation ahead of time if you can send that either to Cassie and she could send us the presentation to review ahead of time.
And if there's time, I can develop it further with the memo Neil mentioned. So yes, I can totally work on that and make sure it's shared with everyone before our next meeting.
All right. Well, we are right on
point
time.
Of order, a point of order. There's still an agenda setting, and is this sounds like that's going to be one of them. What's going to happen at the next meeting will be.
We're going to So that's going to be just a few days before that council presentation. So we're going to synthesize what we talked about today, and then me working with the chairs are going to propose those next action steps that I described and the other parts of that council presentation. And then my hope is to actually maybe even do like a draft presentation to you all. And then so that you all have input, and then we can use some discussion time to say if there's additional things, since we didn't get to the notes today, like those additional things you kind of want to add or make sure that are also made clear to the council. So I anticipate that will take a fair bit of the meeting. And then with the climate emergency declaration probably taking up the rest. That's what I was thinking. And then also I do want to take a little time to talk about like a work plan for the fall. And then I have some kind of some updates on work plan for the winter once I return in January, since next meeting will be my last meeting with you guys for a couple months.
Quick question on the climate emergency part of it, Cassie. Is this a good time to see if anyone from the committee wants to work with me on that, or is that something we'll have to take a vote on next meeting?
No, I think we can do that. Is there anyone that is interested in the climate emergency declaration that wants to work with Covey on maybe the memo and kind of thinking it through?
And it sounds like Neil had already offered working with the chair and co-chair, so I don't know how that would work with the public meeting regulations.
We can still be small and just work with you on developing that. Yeah.
Sounds great.
All right. We are basically right on time. We took an actual voted on action. So these are big steps. Great work, team. And we'll see you in a month with some homework, especially on notes for these actions. So make sure to check for meeting minutes and prepare just like you did for this meeting. So great work.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thanks everyone.